All right, so this is a lecture for session 4.3, Applied Calculus, MXC 2233. So in this one, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the alternative formula for the chain rule. So if y is f of g of x, so if y is defined to be the composition of two functions, f of x and g of x, then y prime of x is f prime of g of x times g prime of x. So in other words, I find the derivative of f, g of x is my inside function, and then times the derivative of g of x, which is g prime. And I'll show you some examples here in a minute. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to evaluate the composition of functions. So for the first one, they're asking us to evaluate f of g of -5. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and find g of -5, which happens to be -37. So then what I'm going to do then is I'm going to find g of -37. And that happens to be 6,919. So in other words, I plug in -37 into f of x, and I get the answer, which is 6,919. So in other words, f of g of -5 is equal to 6,119. So the next one we're going to do is find g of f of -5. And so what happens is that f of -5 happens to be 135. And so then I'm going to go ahead and find then g of 135, which is 1,083. And so that's the answer for number 2 and number 4. So now here we're going to find the answer to number 8, which is, in this case, what we're going to do is going to find f of g of x, and then we're going to find g of f of x. So f of g of x is going to be -8 times x plus 5, x over 5 plus 4 plus 9. To be -8x over 5 minus 32 plus 9. And so if I combine the -32 and 9 and then multiply it by 5, I'm going to end up with -8x minus 115 over 5. And so that's the first part, f of g of x. So the next one is g of f of x, which is going to be -8x plus 9 over 5 plus 4. And so if I multiply the 4 times the 5, I'm going to get 20. So it's going to be plus 20 over 5, sorry, not 4. Which is going to be -8x plus 29 over 5. Now for number 12, f of g of x is going to be 9 times 2 square root of x plus 2 minus 11 times 2 square root of x plus 2 squared, right? And so this is going to be 9, and then it's going to be 4x plus 2 minus 22 square root of x plus 2. And so it's going to be, what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine the 4 and the x plus 2 first. So it's going to be 4x plus 8 minus 22 square root of x plus 2, which is 36x plus 72 minus 22 square root of x plus 2. Now the next one, g of f of x, she's going to be 2 times 9x squared minus 11x plus 2. And that's all you can do with that one. Now number 16, we're going to write this as a composition of two functions in preparation for what we're going to do next, which is find the derivative. So here I'm going to define f of x as my outside function, and then g of x is going to be my inside function, which happens to be 3x squared minus 7. And so in other words, what I did was I said, well, y is f of g of x. That's the way I looked at it. So let's find the derivative of the first one. So y is equal to 2x to the third plus 9x raised to the fifth power. So I'm going to say that f of x, my outside function, is x to the fifth power which means that f prime of x is going to be 5x to the fourth power, right? And so then I'm going to go ahead and say that my inside function g of x is 2x to the third plus 9x, which will make my derivative of that to be 6x squared plus 9. And so what happens is that f prime of g of x is equal to 5 times 2x to the third plus 9x to the fourth, right? And then g prime we said is that, so therefore y prime is going to be 5 2x to the third plus 9x to the fourth times 6x squared plus 9. And of course we can go ahead and combine this if we want to, but we'll just leave it that way. So number 26, what we're going to do for number 26 is what we can do is we're going to say f of t is equal to 12t raised to the 3 over 2. So f prime of t is going to be 12, 3 over 2 t raised to the 1/2. Because 3 over 2 minus 2 over 2 is just going to be 1 over 2. And so this is going to end up being, so if I do 12 divided by 2, it's going to be 6. 6 times 3 is 18, so this is 18 t raised to the 1/2. Now g of t is my inside function, which is 2t to the fourth plus 5. So g prime of t then is going to be 8t to the third. So then f prime of g of t, let me do it this way, is going to be equal to 18 times 2t to the fourth plus 5 raised to the 1/2. And so s prime of t then becomes 18 times 2t to the fourth plus 5 to the 1/2 times 8t to the third, which ends up being 144t to the third times 2t to the fourth plus 5 to the 1/2. And so that's number 26. Now, number 30, we're going to have to use the product rule and the power rule. And so what I'm going to do here then is I'm going to define f of t to be 4t. So then f prime is f prime of t. Oops, sorry. F prime of t is just going to be 4. Now, the next one is I'm going to say, well, u of t is going to be t to the fourth. U prime of t is going to be 4t to the third, right? So this is my f, and then I define this to be my u. Let me do it a little better than that. So this is going to be my u of g of t, right? And so then my g of t is 2t to the fifth plus 3, which makes my g prime of t to be 10 t to the fourth, right? Now, u prime of g of t is going to be 4 times 2t to the fifth plus 3 raised to the third power. And so, my ultimate function here is going to be then the derivative of the second part of it is going to be the following. So it's going to be, let's define that function to be, let's make it n. So n prime of t would be 4t to the third times 10t to the fourth, right? And so what's going to happen then is that I'm going to have, so r prime of t is going to be 4t times 2t to the fifth plus 3 to the third plus 10t to the fourth, right? I'm going to have to delete some of this here real quick, so I have some space. And that's going to be plus, and in this case here, it's just going to be 2t to the fifth plus 3 to the fourth times 4. Right? And so when I combine some of these terms together, right? So if I multiply the 4 times the t times the 4t is going to be 160t to the fifth times 2t to the fifth plus 3 to the third power plus, in this case here, is going to be the 4. It's going to move the 4 to the front, which makes life a little easier. Then I can take out a 2t to the fifth plus 3. So 2t to the fifth plus 3 to the third power. And then this is going to be 160t to the fifth plus 4 times 2t to the fifth plus 3, right? Because I took out 3 of them. And then I can further combine these, right? So then this is, when I further combine these two, it can be 2t to the fifth plus 3 to the third, right? Times, and then if I multiply the inside, so it's going to be 160t to the fifth plus 8t to the fifth plus 12, which is 168t to the fifth plus 12. And so if I were to, clean up the second part of it, right? I think it will look like what the textbook has it, which will be just 42t to the fifth plus 3. So let me just do it the way the textbook has it so you guys can see what I did. So this will just be 42t to the fifth plus 3. So it's the same thing. So that's how you do 30. 32 will be the same, right? We're going to have to use the product rule, and we're going to have to use the power rule. So I have 2 functions here. So I'm going to do the first one, which is the first function. So I'm going to say that that's f of x is equal to x to the third plus 2. So f prime of x is equal to 3x squared. That's my first function. And then g of x is going to be my outside function for my second function, which is x to the fourth. Then g prime of x will be 4x to the third. The inside function I'm going to say is h of x, which is going to be x squared minus 1. So h prime of x would be 2x. So then g prime of h of x, right, is going to be 4 times x squared minus 1 to the third power. And then if I multiply that times my 2x, then my final one, g prime of h of x times h prime of x, is equal to 4x squared minus 1 to the third power times 2x, which will just be 8x times x squared minus 1 to the third, right? So that's the derivative of the second function. So y prime of x is x to the third power plus 2 times 8x, x squared minus 1 to the third, plus the second function, which is x squared minus 1 to the fourth, times my 3x squared. So here it looks like I can take out an x squared minus 1 to the third power, which will leave me an x to the third plus 2 times 8x plus 3x squared, right? So x squared minus 1 to the third. Now if I combine all of these here, it's going to be 8x to the fourth plus 16x plus 3x squared. And so I can further combine these. And so I'm just going to leave it this way. So x squared minus 1 to the third times 8x to the fourth plus 3x squared plus 16x. And that's number 32. And if I were to take out let me make sure that I didn't miss anything here. So, oh wait, I actually did. Let me just clean this up a little bit. Sorry, I do apologize for that. I left out the, so I'm going to take out an x squared minus 1 to the third, left with x to the third plus 2 times 8x, plus an x squared minus 1 times 3x squared. That's what I left out. So x squared minus 1 to the third, 8x to the fourth plus 16x plus 3x to the fourth minus 3x squared. So x squared minus 1 to the third. And so then this one here becomes 11x to the fourth minus 3x squared plus 16x. And I can leave it that way there, so apologize for that. All right, number 38, you're going to have to do the, so I'm going to leave 38 extra for you guys. So remember here, you're going to have to do the chain rule, and you're going to have to do the quotient rule in order to finish that one. All right, let's look at number 53. Number 53 is a word problem. Let me just pull it up here real quick. So here what they're asking us is to find, for number 53, they're asking us to find the demand in terms of the cost. So in other words, they gave us d of p to be negative p to the second power over 100 plus 500. And then they said that p of c is equal to 2c minus 10. So then what they're asking us to do is to find d of p of c, which is going to be negative 2c minus 10 to the second power over 100 plus 500. And then we can clean this up a little bit if we so desire. But basically what we're going to end up here when we clean everything up is negative c squared plus 10c plus 12,475 over 25. And you guys can double check that one if you want. So number 54, they're asking us to find, so they give us the revenue function, r of x is equal to 24x squared plus x raised to the 2/3. So they're asking us to find r prime of x. And then so r prime of x basically ends up being, if you do the product rule, you just do the chain rule basically. You end up with 16x squared plus x to the negative 1/3 times 2x plus 1. So that's r prime of x. So then r prime of 100, if you plug that in, you'll get about 148.78, which ends up being $148.78. R prime of 200 is approximately 187.29, which is $187.29. And then r prime of 300 is approximately 214.34, which is $214.34. And then part D is they're asking us for the average, or r prime of, or r hat of x, which is 24 x squared plus x raised to the 2/3 over x. And so what I'm going to leave for you guys as extra is to find r hat prime of x. Find that. And that's the end of 4.3. Thank you. Let me just close.